And again, in one of the very rare instances, we actually ended up taking the law and order enforcement authorities to the Bombay High Court, where on the strength of the arguments we made, the High Court judge in fact transferred the matter to the CBI and actually passed strictures against the local government. I think there are very few corporates who would have the courage to actually file a suit which effectively will indict the government of the state in which they operate. But we did it because we believed in our cause and we thought that we were not being dealt with fairly. So these are three episodes where it wasn't easy. We could have, and we did in fact, suffer consequences because of what we thought were righteous actions that we took as a business house. And we lost business opportunities as a result, or were not able to enter businesses as a result. But it is in fact what we are actually very proud of. And the fact that you can be proud of actually losing business or of acting in a way that can potentially come back to hurt you, I think should tell you a lot about the way all of us in Tata's think about what we are here for and the purpose we really serve. So I think those examples would give you a sense that we are willing to walk the talk. Many of you will remember Mr. Tata's famous statement about, if you put a gun to my head, you better be willing to pull the trigger, because I'm going to do what I said and I'm not going to turn back. And that's pretty much been the philosophy and approach of this group. There's somebody who's written a book on Tatas, and there's a very nice chart which I thought I'd bring this to an end with, where he talks about how does all this actually work for the brand, for the business. And he says it starts with, as I started my talk, with addressing social and community needs, which in turn leads to positive perceptions among other stakeholders and creates a good reputation, which we fortunately have. This in turn creates commitment and satisfaction on the part of our own employees. So all of us feel proud that we work for a group that gives away money for charity and other causes. Because the employees are motivated, it creates efficiency, there's a commitment to excellence and innovation, on the back of which you start seeing strong business performance. And that in turn generates good returns to the investors. And that in turn results in satisfaction on the part of investors and long-term shareholding. I think that's one of the things many Tata listed stocks are reputed for, that people tend to invest and then hold on. You don't sort of easily buy and sell necessarily. So that really, I think, is the way we've seen it pan out. Now, I'm not saying that we are paragons of virtue and we've got it right every time, but broadly, this has been the philosophy. And this has been the reason why I think we've earned so much trust. There was an exercise to try and value the Tata brand alone by an entity called Brand Finance earlier this year. They've pegged the value at $18.1 billion, and that places us in the top 50 global brands in the world. And I think a lot of this is because of where we started and the fundamental philosophy that this group has, starting with our founder and then consistently maintained through successive chairmen. Our current chairman, Cyrus Mistry, is the one who in fact coined this new term for the role I play, which is brand custodian. And as I said, he asked me to wear 3 hats, not 1, because all 3 in a manner of speaking converge into the way in which you think about the Tata brand. So with that, I think I'll stop. I was told that I should allow maybe a couple of questions from the audience, if any of you have any questions, and then I will hand over to our next speaker. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, so that's extremely interesting. My question was, how are you going to take this forward? Because you're no longer a conglomerate of Indian companies, but a global $100 billion conglomerate. How are you going to take this across to the world that you are present at? you know, the same ethics, the culture that makes the group that it is today?
Uh, that's, I think, a very good question. Part of the reason that we've integrated the whole CSR and ethics element with the brand is precisely to address that, because so much of what we'll need to do will entail communication. I think the workforces that have joined us from overseas geographies, who've not been part of this culture for the last 140 years in India, they need to be educated, they need to be trained, they need to understand why we do what we do. And we are also emphasizing that in each of our markets, wherever in the world we may be, there will be a significant CSR element also. So in the UK, there's a whole lot that we are doing, whether it is treatment of cancer patients, whether it is skills building, apprentice programs at Jaguar Land Rover and Tata Steel Europe and so on. Similarly, in Africa, the large number of scholarships that we offer to students. We brought significant numbers of South Africans to India to be trained in different skills and then sent back to their country. So in all the markets we operate in, we are making sure that all of these elements that we take pride about in India are replicated. But it is something that takes time, that you have to keep talking about, and by demonstrating with your actions, hopefully people also appreciate and then have a greater sense of attachment to the brand for that reason. The other interesting thing, I think, is the last few years, particularly since the financial crisis of 2008, many more people now are aware of, the downside of some of the sharp corporate practices of the past. And there is less respect now for people who sort of break rules, circumvent regulation, or find easy markets where none of this is important, and make their fortunes in commodities and so on, and then are able to sort of bring it back to developed markets. I think people are now very conscious, thanks to the internet and NGOs and the social media now. It's very hard for people to hide from criticism when they don't behave properly. And people are seeing that constructs like ours, which is more of a sort of trusteeship concept, where you're not necessarily doing what you do to enrich a small group of shareholders, but doing something that has much bigger significance, is becoming that much more relevant. So, there are researchers now who are rethinking the whole idea of what is the firm and what will make for a successful firm in the long term. So I think that's resonating, and the businesses we've acquired, JLR and Tata Steel Europe, were in fact in the aftermath or around the time of the financial crisis. So I think people there understand, and there is a lot of respect for what we've done in India, and a keenness to try and see this replicated in other markets as well. Yes, please.
My name is John Matthews. I'm the proud son of a Tata employee. I would ask you a question. There's nothing to do with Tatas. There's so much potential in India. We are a giant in our own way, and the next century belongs to Asia. We have intellectual capital, which is the asset of the future. What do you think is wrong with India, its polity, its governance, politics, and where do you see India in the next, say, 20 years, if not more?
I think we can spend the next few days discussing that. But in my last avatar, I was a private equity fund manager, and my biggest challenge was trying to sell our fund to overseas investors, because it was a fund which really was accepting only third-party capital from outside India. And as much as we were trying to sell the Tata story, because it was a fund to largely invest into Tata Group companies, unlisted Tata companies, we had to also sell the India proposition, the India growth story. I have conviction that the India growth story is there to stay. The next 15, 20 years will be seeing great opportunities. I think many Indian corporates have imbibed some of the global best practices, are becoming strong innovators, and can hold their own in any market. But the best thing about India is the demographic dividend. I think the consumption story and the way that is going to play out is going to be of great value to Indian corporates that have a strong position here, and then are also going overseas to seek opportunity. The issues with India are obviously all the primary issues: land, labor, capital. the land acquisition bill is there. Hopefully it creates more transparency, but there are significant question marks over the increased cost of operation it is going to create for corporates. We'll have to see how that plays out in Parliament. Labor, I think, has been a major bottleneck for Indian enterprise, and people have found ways to get around labor regulation, which is neither healthy for the organized labor force in India, nor is it healthy for corporates to grow fast. So I think maybe the next government will need to address that, because I think India is in a sense being held back because of some of these somewhat outdated regulations on labor. We do need to create a safety net for people who lose jobs, but outside of that, I think corporates, particularly in today's world which is so volatile, need to have the flexibility to be able to respond fast to market reactions. And capital, I think, particularly for infrastructure build out in India, whether it's the corporate bond market or it is FDI being allowed into the country in much bigger numbers. You know, there's no point taking pride in the fact that we are 10 times what we were 5 years or 10 years back. We need to be 100 times that if you have to create the jobs in this economy to sustain those 130, 140 million kids who are going to come into the market in the next 10 years. So I think that again is something which it looks like now government is waking up to the fact that, you know, you need to allow foreign capital to participate because Indian capital has its own constraints. And we need much more capital than we have currently. So those would be, I think, three major factors of production. And then the whole governance architecture in this country. I think we've all seen and witnessed enough about levels of corruption in this country and the implications it has. What one would hope is that many more of us, all of us in this room, come into the party political system. I think there's no way we can evade that responsibility. I think until we start participating or working with the political parties, we can't really crib about what's going on in this country. We need to, in a sense, be the change that we want to see happen in society. But you know, there are so many people who are now coming into the market with different ideas. You know, when we look for instance, I just put out an advertisement for people to work in our CSR unit. And we got several dozen applications, people who are in business, very successful, very young, who are saying, you know, bahut dekh liya, abhi I want to do something for society. And at that age, in the mid-20s and late 20s, to have that kind of feeling is awesome. So I think people are changing with more education, more awareness, and more desire to see change. I think you will find society, in a sense, coming to its own rescue. But all of us need to push that process along. I think we have our role to play as well in mentoring and guiding and championing and being, I think there's no escape from being part of the party political process. I think we will need to do that. One of my friends is trying to do a very interesting strategy where he feels that people like us who can be tempted to enter but may not yet be willing to enter do still constitute a significant swing vote. So even if you can't marshal 25-30% of the electoral votes, if you can marshal 1 or 2%, sometimes that's the difference between the winner and the loser. So if you are the swing element, you can still have influence. So there are various ways in which people can try this, but I think all of us need to think about that. And with general elections looming large, I think there's an opportunity for those of us who are interested to jump into the process. Right.
I think we are running out of time. I'm sorry, but I think we have the next session following this. I think we'll keep it for some other time. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Rajan, one sec. Payal will just felicitate him. Atul, you learn.
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to now introduce Dr. Devdutt Pattanaik. Dr. Devdutt Pattanaik writes and lectures extensively on the relevance of mythology in matters related to leadership, entrepreneurship, branding, management, and governance. He serves as Chief Belief Officer of the Future Group. Trained in medicine, he spent 15 years in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries. before joining Ernst & Young as business advisor. All this while, he spent his spare time studying and writing on sacred stories, symbols, and rituals and their impact on culture. Currently, he is the leadership coach and inspirational speaker to many organizations beside Future Group. His columns on management and culture that appear in Economic Times are a hit with general and specialist readers. His show Business Sutra with CNBC 18 and Shastrat with CNBC Awaz are popular with viewers for their innovative approach and simplicity. He has written over 25 books for everyone, from adults to children, for youth to business executives. I now request Dr. Devdutt Pattanaik to take the stage.
Where is the... No. Thank you. Sorry, I was supposed to check this before the session, so I'm very particular about this. Thank you for calling me. My name is Devdutt. Before I begin, how many of you all are entrepreneurs? Yeah, that's important, just to get a sense of the room. Can you put this on that side also? Yeah. Only one? Can you see the screen? Because I'll be covering it. Or shift it. Because then you can't see the screen if you're covering this. Okay, I'll just begin before the preliminary.